I want to talk about how I went from working for Yodel, earning 75 pence per parcel, to earning £75,000 per year working for Deloitte. How I did that was with good decision making and difficult conversations. I think the first difficult inflection point, if you will, in the story begins with the investment. So when I was delivering parcels for Yodel, I had a startup idea, and I had been pitching this idea to anybody and everyone in the southwest of England who would listen. Anybody and everyone who was interested in a startup, tech startup, I was pitching my idea to them. And one investor was actually interested. And what they were interested in was the idea, because that's all it was. I had nothing to show for it. And me as an entrepreneur. And so over the course of 9 months during 2015, I had a conversation with this investor. And it was one big, long conversation. And it took many meetings, it took many iterations from me, it took a lot of pivots, it took some rejections, it took suggestions, it took everything and anything. You know, we brought it all to the table. And what the investor was really interested in was my ability as an entrepreneur to take an idea and then make something from it. And for many different reasons, despite agreeing to invest in my idea in the summer of 2015, the money didn't actually land until the December of that year. And so for me, it was a difficult period of time whereby I needed the resource to give me the runway and the freedom to try and get this idea off the ground. But equally, obviously, I needed to live. I needed to pay my bills. But I think that's where the story sort of really begins, I think, for me, and how I began the journey to get from delivering parcels to delivering projects. And when 2016 began, I started to meet with venture capitalists. I started to try to really create a prototype for my startup. And I will talk about that in a future episode, I think, because that is a story in itself. But essentially, it failed. While I was failing at trying to get my startup to the next level, I was also coaching, so I was also trying to ramp up my own coaching business. I was delivering skills training workshops, and I began to deliver those at universities and deliver them for corporate clients such as accountants. And that really began to get momentum, to gain momentum. Sadly, due to things that happened in my personal life, like that was knocked off track. And by the August of 2016, like I was no longer in a position to be able to dedicate my time to the businesses. Again, I'll discuss that in a future episode. But yeah, just to get out of the 75 pence per parcel, the investment, the £10,000 of investment managed to get me out of that. You know, it managed to get me off that first rung. And then in the October of 2016, despite the personal problems I had fortunately booked in a training course for directors of a very big corporate company on their away day. And for that, I earned £1,500 for the day. So I managed to go from earning, say, £6,000 take home, really, in 2015 to £1,500 in a single day in 2016. And that was off my own back. It was me putting myself out there, creating a network within the southwest of England, running free workshops, giving talks at business expos and conferences, and essentially self-marketing myself really as a trainer. I think that the next kind of difficult decision and difficult conversation came at the beginning of 2017 when, the work I was getting was not consistent enough to pay the bills. And also I had run out of runway with the startup and burned through the £10,000 without gaining venture capitalist investment. So at the beginning of 2017, I knew that I had to go out and earn a stable and secure income. And that's mainly, again, for personal reasons. And how I did that was I went back to what I knew, which was fitness coaching. I got a salaried position. I was managed to continue my coaching and training above and beyond and around that work. And I suppose the difficult conversation was sort of going back into, say, a fitness industry interview and feeling a bit like an imposter again, because I'd been out the industry for quite a few years. I had to dust off my kind of CV and my certificates, and I suppose go in there kind of very humble and very, very modest, and look to do what I had done many years before. I think having the salaried fitness instructor job allowed me that little bit of security, but the truth was I just wasn't earning enough. And the startup idea that I'd had gave me an insight into tech. Again, these are things that I'll go into more depth with it in future videos. In 2018, I knew that I had to make a change. And I decided to apply for a bootcamp. I did the test, I got accepted, and then I began early in 2018 on a coding bootcamp. I'd never written a line of code in my life. So I left my sort of 21k per year position as lead coach in fitness, and I went into a full-time coding bootcamp for 4 months, earning nothing, paying £8,000 for the course, and then having to find £2,000 a month to live on. I applied for a job towards the end of the course, and I got offered that job. And I'll never forget, I was on a train to London at the time, going to a friend's wedding, and I got a phone call to say, we'd love to offer you the position. And I thought, okay, this is fantastic, this is brilliant. And I said, okay, how much? And they said, okay, we would like to offer you £24,000. And I was devastated. I was really taken back. Like I had an idea. I had a good idea about what to expect, and it was more. And I knew that really I needed to take home £2,000 a month. And that's what I needed at the time. And so I said there and then on the phone, I said, I'll be honest, I was expecting more. And I had to have a difficult conversation. But I pushed for it, and I said, like, I need, and the guy on the end of the phone, the lead developer, had said, like, okay, let me go and speak to the MD, see what I can do. How much do you need? And I said, well, really, I need 26, because I need to get to somewhere close to 2k after tax. Anyway, he rang back like 15 minutes later and said, yeah, we agreed to it, 26k. Perfect. So within a year of kind of me into that I suppose, junior industry entry level position. I was then being asked to do more and more things. I went from like a support engineer to a fully fledged developer, and I was certainly giving more value to the company at that point. And so I asked for a pay rise, and I asked for a 4k pay rise to go on to 30k. And the MD agreed to it conditionally and said that they would give me a pay rise of 2k to 28k, and then it would be a performance-based thing to check how I was doing after 6 months, and then they would increase to 30k. And that's what happened. At the end of 2019, I then applied for a job with Deloitte. I was successful, I got it, and I had to have a difficult conversation with my then kind of manager to say, actually, you know what, like I've got this position, I'm going. And it is difficult. I think, though, you know, they're the pivotal moments for us all. It was a difficult conversation to have, to, you know, to basically, I suppose, you have a feeling of letting someone down. I started with Deloitte on £38,000 per year as a consultant. And then after 1 year, we had our end of year reviews, which was the first ever time I'd been through anything like that. I'd never worked for a corporate before. And I did everything in my power to get a promotion. But a lot of it was out of my hands. And again, I'll talk about that in a future video. Everyone had told me that it wasn't possible, but at the same time, I knew that I was acting at the next level up, at least. You know, I'd been told by, you know, senior people in the business who had worked beside me that I was working, you know, far beyond my current pay grade. And so I knew that I deserved to be compensated accordingly. The result of the year end came back, and they told me that I hadn't been promoted. In fact, they didn't even tell me that. They just told me my bonus and my new salary. And I was the one that then had to ask on the phone to a senior partner, like, what about the promotion? And they said, oh, we didn't know you were going for that. And so that then led to a series of difficult conversations with people in the business, essentially me asking, like, why has this not happened? Like, you know, the decision's been made. I was represented by somebody else. I couldn't, you know, I wasn't able to represent myself. I know that if you do your due diligence properly and you speak to the people in the business who've worked with me, then you would know that I am deserving of this promotion. And the decision was overturned. And it was the first time that many people had ever seen that done in Deloitte. And these are people who've been in the business for 25 years. I got a phone call from a partner and they said, I've never done this before. I've never had this conversation. So I went from £38,000 to £50,000 plus a bonus. So I increased my take-home salary by about 10k in one phone call. The next year, a very similar thing happened, except this time I was promoted after the year-end decision. So I didn't need to have that difficult conversation. But I suppose the difficult conversation there and the inflection point was I needed to prove to the person who was representing me at the year-end review that I was deserving of another promotion. And of course to the panel, you know, who already knew my history and knew that I had been accelerated, you know, up the ranks. And that then led me to £70,000 basic plus a £5,000 to £6,000 bonus. And that was in 2022. And so that's how within 7 years I went from 75 pence per parcel working for Yodel delivering parcels to £75,000 per year delivering software projects for Deloitte.